My dad and stepmom sold my childhood bed for $50 while I was away at school and said, "You don't belong here anymore." I slept in my car that night. 5 years later, when they tried to get close to my daughter, I told them, "She doesn't need people who threw me away like trash." "You sold my bed?" I asked, standing in the doorway of my old bedroom, now filled with someone else's clothes and a strange smell of cologne. "It was taking up space," Tarina said flatly, not even bothering to look at me. My dad shrugged. "You're barely here. You don't belong here anymore, Celia." That night, I slept in my car behind a gas station. 5 years later, they showed up on my doorstep holding a stuffed bear for the daughter they never once congratulated me on. I told them, "She doesn't need people who threw me away like trash." And I meant every word. It still feels strange to tell this story, mostly because I've spent so many years trying to forget it. My name is Celia. I'm a nurse in Colorado, a wife, and now a mother. But before all that, I was a girl who lost her mom too soon and spent the rest of her youth trying to feel like she still belonged somewhere. My mother died when I was 12. Brain aneurysm. It was fast, cruel, and unexpected. One moment we were baking cookies together, and the next she was slumped over the kitchen table. I called 911. I held her hand in the ambulance. I never forgot the color of her lips that day. My father, Rod, was never the same after she died, and to be honest, neither was I. We didn't grieve together. He pulled away into silence and distraction, and I clung to routines and memories. I tried to keep everything in the house the way Mom left it. Her Afghans folded over the couch, her collection of bird figurines on the windowsill. But one by one, things disappeared. The first time I noticed something was missing, it was a small thing, her favorite coffee mug. Then it was a blanket. Then one day, her rocking chair just wasn't there anymore. When I asked, Rod would shrug and say something about needing to move forward. A year and a half after she passed, he met Tarina. She came into our lives like a cold wind through a cracked window. Polished, exact, always correcting me. The type of woman who always carried breath mints and judged everyone silently. Tarina had a daughter, Brielle, who was a year younger than me. I wouldn't call us close. Brielle treated me like someone who had overstayed her welcome. Like I was an outsider. Like I was the guest. They moved in quickly. My room became smaller, not physically, but emotionally. It went from being mine to being the extra room. Tarina slowly invaded every inch of our home. New curtains, new furniture, new rules. Even new spices in the kitchen. My mom's recipe box? Tossed. The last real photo of me and my mom? Replaced by one of Brielle and Rod on the mantel. And Rod. He didn't fight it. Maybe he was tired. Maybe he thought it was easier to let the past be replaced. Or maybe he didn't think of me as much more than an obligation. I couldn't wait to get out. I threw myself into school and was accepted into Colorado State. I thought maybe distance would help. That if I gave things time, space, and maturity, we'd eventually meet somewhere in the middle. But every visit home chipped away at that hope. Freshman year winter break, my old dresser had been painted gray and filled with Brielle's clothes. Sophomore year, I came home to find my bookshelf emptied and used for decorative candles. Junior year, my bed had accidentally been given away to one of Tarina's coworkers who needed it more. I was becoming a ghost in my own childhood home. Senior spring break was the last time I ever set foot in that house. I'd texted Rod to say I was coming. No reply, but that wasn't unusual. I figured they were just being themselves. When I got there, it was around 8 p.m. I let myself in with the spare key, stomach grumbling from the long drive. There were shoes everywhere. A strange guy was sitting in the living room, watching TV, sipping beer. He looked at me like I was the intruder. I went to my room, except it wasn't mine. The walls were painted a deep green. New bedding. No sign of me anywhere. Brielle's boyfriend was lounging on the bed, shirtless. That was the first time I said out loud, "What the hell?" Tarina came down the hall, wine in hand. "Oh, Celia," she said flatly. "We weren't expecting you." "That bed?" "We sold it. $50. Honestly, it was just taking up space." Rod appeared behind her, chewing something, his mouth half full as he added, "You're barely here anymore. You don't belong here." I stood there, keys in hand, face hot. I didn't yell. I didn't cry, not then. I turned and walked out. Got into my car, drove until I hit the 24-hour Walmart in town, and parked behind the building where it was dark and quiet. That night, I curled up in the passenger seat with my coat pulled over me like a blanket and cried until my throat hurt. I didn't go back. They didn't check on me. They didn't call. I graduated a few months later and never heard from them. The months after graduation felt hollow. Most of my classmates were celebrating, hugging their parents, going out for dinners with families who brought flowers and cameras. I smiled for photos with my friends, but I remember how heavy my robe felt, like I was wearing someone else's pride. Rod didn't come. Tarina didn't even text. I got my degree, packed up my little apartment in Fort Collins, and moved into a shared rental with 2 other nurses in Denver. I worked night shifts, picked up overtime, and paid off what I could of my student loans. I kept to myself a lot in those days. No real contact with my family. Brielle unfollowed me on everything, which, honestly, was a relief. I learned how to cook for one. I learned how to fix a clogged sink. I learned what loneliness felt like when it wasn't dramatic, just quiet and steady, like a faucet dripping in another room. I also started therapy. I was tired of pretending it didn't affect me. I was tired of telling people I was just focused on work when what I really meant was, I don't know how to be close to people because the people who should have loved me made me feel like a burden for existing. My therapist's name was Alara. She didn't ask about Rod or Tarina at first. She started with my mom. "You mention her in the present tense a lot," she said once. And I did. "Mom likes lilacs. Mom would say this. Mom would have loved this song." It was like some part of me refused to let go of the only person who ever made me feel whole. 3 years passed like that. Then Lucan came into my life. We met through a coworker at the hospital who insisted we'd get along because you both know how to actually listen. I rolled my eyes but went along to the group dinner anyway. He was quiet. Not shy, just deliberate. He didn't try to be funny or charming. He just noticed things. Like when I was uncomfortable and changed the subject. Or when I didn't eat much and offered to split his meal instead of commenting. We didn't fall in love fast. We grew into each other. The way trees bend toward the sun over time. Lucan had a past too, an ex-wife who cheated, a sister he barely spoke to, a dad who drank. We talked about that stuff early. There was no pretending we were blank slates. We were both patchwork people, but something about us fit. We got married 2 years after we met. A small ceremony in Estes Park, just us, a few close friends, and his parents, who hugged me like I'd been theirs forever. My side of the aisle? Empty. I didn't invite Rod. Or Tarina. Or Brielle. Lucan never pushed. He'd met them once, briefly, accidentally, when we ran into Rod and Tarina at a grocery store about a year into dating. It was the most awkward 5 minutes of my life. Rod had said, "So, this is the boyfriend," and stared at Lucan like he was inspecting a rental car. Tarina didn't speak at all. Lucan smiled politely, shook hands, and then walked me straight to the parking lot afterward. "They're not nice people," he said gently. "I know," I replied, and that was that. A year later, Mireia was born. I wasn't ready. I thought I was, but nothing prepares you for that first moment. She was so small. So loud. So fragile. Something cracked open in me that day, not in a painful way, but in the way a locked chest finally gives way to light. I held her, and every wound from my own childhood rose to the surface like old bruises. I cried a lot those first few weeks, not just from exhaustion, but from grief, gratitude, fear, and love all mixing together. Lucan's parents came over every other day, bringing food, folding laundry, just holding Mireia so I could shower or cry or both. They called her our little miracle. Rod didn't call. Neither did Tarina. I had posted exactly one photo online of Mireia, just her tiny feet in my palm, and I made sure they couldn't see it. I thought maybe they didn't care. Then one evening, about 5 weeks postpartum, I got a text from a number I hadn't saved. "Congratulations. We'd love to meet her. When's a good time?" No signature, but I knew the tone. It was Rod. Always acting like time erased accountability. I stared at the message for an hour. Lucan came into the room, saw the look on my face, and asked, "You okay?" I showed him the phone. He just raised his eyebrows. "What do you want to do?" I didn't reply to the text. Not then. But 2 weeks later, they showed up. Just like that. Uninvited. At our house. Lucan had gone out to grab diapers. I was alone with Mireia, who had finally fallen asleep on my chest after hours of fussing. Doorbell rang. I checked the camera. It was them. Rod was holding a cheap stuffed bear. Tarina was behind him, wearing that stiff, polite mask she always wore when trying to act normal. I didn't open the door right away. I held my daughter tighter and just stared through the glass. Then I opened it, only halfway. "Celia," Rod said. "We wanted to," I cut him off. "She's asleep." Tarina stepped forward. "We brought her something." I looked down at the bear. It still had the plastic tag on it. "You can't just show up like this," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Rod looked uncomfortable. "We didn't know how else to start." "Start?" I repeated. "After all these years?" "We just want to see her," he said, like it was a perfectly reasonable request. I took a deep breath. My heart was thudding, but my voice came out clear. "She doesn't need people who threw me away like trash." He blinked. Tarina's face hardened. Rod tried again. "Celia, come on. We're still family." I didn't answer. I closed the door, slow and steady. Locked it. Went back to Mireia, who was still sleeping, warm and safe against me. They stood there for a few more minutes. I watched from the window as they walked back to their car, Rod silent, Tarina shaking her head. They haven't tried since. They left without another word. And when I heard the engine of their car fade away, something inside me did too. Not grief exactly, not that sharp pain I felt years ago when they chipped away at my place in the house I grew up in. This was quieter, deeper. Like the final click of a door that had been cracked open for too long. And now, finally, shut. That night, I didn't tell Lucan right away what happened. He came home to find me sitting on the couch, Mireia on my chest, both of us asleep. I don't even remember closing my eyes. Just the weight of her on me, her breathing soft and even, and the strange, blurry comfort of that moment. He gently took her and carried her to her bassinet, then came back and sat next to me. "They came by, didn't they?" he asked. I nodded. "Yep." He didn't press. Just put his hand on mine. And that was enough. Later that week, I told my therapist everything. Alara didn't seem surprised. "You didn't expect them to come, but part of you always thought they might." I nodded. And part of me thought, maybe I'd want them to. "That's okay," she said. "It's human. We all crave closure. But sometimes, what we get instead is confirmation." She was right. I didn't need more chaos. I didn't need an apology dragged from their throats like rusted nails. What I got that day, the way they stood there, awkward and vaguely entitled, told me everything I needed to know. They hadn't changed. Not really. Rod still couldn't look me in the eyes when things got hard. Tarina still had that tone in her voice, the one that carried more judgment than care. And both of them, deep down, still thought they had a claim to something they gave up years ago. For a few weeks after that, I was in a weird headspace. I kept thinking about my mom. Wondering what she would have done if she were still alive. What she'd say if she saw what had become of Rod. Of our family. It was hard not to play that game. What if she hadn't died? I let myself sit with it one night while feeding Mireia. The house was dark except for the lamp in the nursery. Lucan was asleep upstairs. Mireia was fussing, but not really crying, just doing that little whimpering, squirmy thing babies do when they're trying to figure out the world. And I whispered to her, "I'll never make you wonder where you stand." That moment wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. But it was honest. And something in me settled. I started journaling again. Writing down things I remembered from my mom, her favorite songs, her go-to recipes, the way she'd fold laundry and hum to herself. I realized I didn't want those memories to die with me. I didn't want Mireia to grow up only knowing the absence. Lucan noticed the shift in me too. He said I laughed more. Slept more deeply. We even started going on little weekend drives with Mireia, just to nowhere in particular. Long drives up toward the mountains or into the quieter parts of town. We'd stop at tiny diners, grab coffee and pie, and just be a family. But then came the letter. It showed up on a random Tuesday. No return address, but the handwriting on the envelope was Rod's. Lucan brought it inside and placed it on the counter without saying a word. I didn't touch it for 2 days. When I finally opened it, I sat at the kitchen table while Mireia napped upstairs. It was handwritten, shaky, like he was trying too hard to seem casual. "Celia, I didn't mean to hurt you. I didn't know what I was doing back then. Tarina and I thought we were doing what was best for everyone. I see now that we made mistakes. I know I can't undo the past. I just want a chance to get to know my granddaughter. Please think about it." Dad, there was no mention of the bed. No mention of the night I slept in my car. No apology for telling me I didn't belong. Just vague regret. A soft plea for a do-over. I didn't respond. What would I even say? That night, I read the letter to Lucan. He listened, quiet as always, but I could see his jaw tighten. "He doesn't get to rewrite history," he said finally. "I know," I replied. "I just don't want Mireia to grow up hating people she doesn't even know." Lucan looked at me, and his voice softened. "She won't. Because you'll raise her with love. With honesty. She'll know what real family feels like." That was the thing. I didn't want vengeance. I didn't want revenge. I just wanted peace. But I also wanted boundaries. Lucan and I had long talks after that. We talked about what it meant to protect our daughter, not just physically, but emotionally. What it meant to break cycles, to choose not to let dysfunction pass through generations like family recipes. We agreed on a few things. Rod and Tarina wouldn't be part of Mireia's life, not until there was proof that they understood what they'd done. Not until there was real accountability, not just vague apologies written on soft paper. I wasn't going to burn the letter. But I wasn't going to frame it either. For now, it stayed in a drawer with other things from my past, yearbooks, photos, my mom's recipe card for oatmeal cookies. It didn't mean anything. But it didn't mean enough. Months passed. Mireia grew, and with every milestone, the letter faded a little more into the background. She rolled over. She babbled. She said Dada first, then Mama. She laughed so hard one time at the dog sneezing that I nearly cried from joy. And with each of those little moments, the ache that Rod and Tarina had left behind softened into something dull and distant. Still there. Still part of my story. But no longer sharp. But wounds like that don't stay buried forever. Especially not when you're raising a child. It started with small questions from strangers. A friendly woman at the park asked, "Is this your first grandchild?" when Lucan's mom was pushing Mireia on the swing. An elderly neighbor saw Lucan's dad walking Mireia up and down the block and said, "Bet she's got 2 sets of grandparents wrapped around her finger." Each time, it was a little stab. Not because I wished Rod and Tarina were involved, but because I hated the reminder. I hated the effort it took to explain their absence. I usually just smiled and said, "Yes, she's very loved." That was true. It was enough. But then, Mireia turned too. She started noticing. She'd point at framed pictures and say, "Who's that?" or name. And one afternoon, while flipping through an old photo album Lucan's mom had put together for her, she paused on a picture from our wedding. Me in white. Lucan beaming. Our friends gathered around. And behind us, an empty side of the aisle. "Where's your mommy and daddy?" she asked, her voice high and innocent. I froze. Lucan, bless him, looked up from his book and gently said, "That's a big question." She repeated it, "Where?" I bent down next to her and smoothed her hair. "My mommy died a long time ago," I said. "Before you were born. But she would have loved you very much." She frowned. "Oh. And then, what about your daddy?" I hesitated. And then I told her the truth, one piece at a time. He didn't know how to be kind to me. He made some choices that hurt. She looked at me with that wide-eyed toddler acceptance. "Like timeout?" "Sort of," I smiled sadly. "A forever timeout." She nodded, then went back to the pictures like it was the most normal thing in the world. To her, it was. She didn't know yet what it meant to be rejected. She didn't know the shape of abandonment. But she would. Someday. And I wanted to make sure when that day came, she'd know the difference between cutting someone out and protecting your peace. That night, I lay in bed next to Lucan and asked, "Do you think I should have said more?" He was quiet for a moment, then said, "I think you said enough for now. Kids understand what they need to, when they need to." But I didn't sleep much that night. I kept replaying her little voice asking, "Where's your daddy?" like it was echoing in a cave inside my chest. The next morning, I pulled out the letter again. It was still there, in the drawer, yellowing slightly along the edges. I hadn't looked at it in nearly a year. It felt smaller now. Powerless. I thought about writing back. Not for Rod's sake, but for mine. To close the loop. To reclaim the last word. But something held me back. Not anger. Not fear. Just a sense that the door wasn't meant to reopen. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table and wrote a letter to Mireia. Not for her to read now. Maybe not even when she's a teenager. But someday. It started simply, "My sweet Mireia, there are things about my past I haven't told you yet. Not because I'm hiding them, but because I wanted to give you a childhood free of their weight." And I kept writing. About my mom. About growing up. About the way love can be both a gift and a weapon, and how the people who are supposed to protect us don't always do it right. I wrote about the night I slept in my car and how lonely I felt, but how that night also made me strong. Strong enough to choose better. To love better. I wrote for an hour. When I finished, I sealed the envelope and tucked it into the back of the same drawer where Rod's letter still sat. One letter from the past. One for the future. Both there, side by side. Silent witnesses to two very different versions of love. The days turned to weeks. Mireia kept growing, taller, louder, more curious. She loved dinosaurs, pretended to read books to her stuffed animals, and insisted that her toast be cut into triangle mountains, not squares. Lucan's parents continued to show up every Sunday with groceries and hugs and stories from when Lucan was little. They'd sit on the floor and play tea with Mireia like it was the highlight of their week. And every once in a while I'd get that faint ripple in my chest. I'm wondering. That small, quiet ache. No regret. Just wondering. What if Rod had tried harder? What if I'd stayed and fought for my place in that house? What if I'd screamed instead of walking away? But the truth is, I did what I had to do. I survived. And now, I am doing more than that. I was living. Fully. Without their approval. Without their permission. And that was something I was starting to be proud of. Still, things have a way of resurfacing when you least expect them. About 2 months after Maria's birthday, I got a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. Voicemail. I waited a few minutes before playing it. It was Brielle. Her voice, still pinched and polite. Uncertain. Hi, Celia. I'm not sure if this is still your number, but I wanted to reach out. Something's happened with Dad. I think you should know. Call me back if you want. I stared at the screen. Lucan walked in with Mireya balanced on his hip. He saw my face and paused. Everything okay? I didn't answer right away. Just looked down at the phone again. I think, I said finally, the past just found a new way to knock. The rest of the day, the voicemail echoed in the back of my mind like a dull ache. I didn't call Brielle back. I didn't even listen to the message again. I just let it sit there on my phone like a weight in my pocket. Lucan didn't press. That was one of the things I loved most about him. He knew when to wait, and when to hold space for silence. But that night, after Mireya was asleep and the house had gone quiet, I found myself on the porch with a cup of cold tea and a mind racing with memories I hadn't invited in years. What could have happened? Was Rod sick? Dying? Dead? Was this Brielle's way of manipulating me into contact? Or had something changed in her, something real? I didn't know. But I did know one thing: if something had happened to Rod, the version of me who still needed closure, she didn't exist anymore. I wasn't looking for redemption. I wasn't waiting for a deathbed apology. But I also wasn't sure I could ignore this entirely. The next day, I dropped Mireya off at Lucan's parents' house and sat in the car outside their house with the phone in my hand. I dialed. Brielle picked up on the second ring. Her voice sounded tight, like someone holding back something sharp. Celia? Yeah. There was a pause. Then, thanks for calling back. I didn't say anything. I just waited. It's Dad, she said. He had a stroke. I swallowed. Hard. Not out of panic or sadness, just the shock of hearing that word connected to him. Stroke. Something irreversible. Something that splits time into before and after. He's in the hospital, she continued. ICU for now. They're not sure how much damage yet. Again, I said nothing. Brielle filled the silence. I know it's been a long time. I just thought you'd want to know. I let the quiet stretch out, then asked, why? She didn't expect that. I don't know. You're his daughter. No matter what happened. No matter what happened, I repeated softly, like I was testing the taste of it. I could feel Brielle bristle through the line. He asked about you. After the stroke? No, she admitted. A few weeks ago. He asked if I thought you'd ever speak to him again. And what did you say? I said I didn't know. I didn't think so. I nodded, though she couldn't see me. You were right. She let out a breath. Okay. There was something in her tone that almost resembled humility. Or maybe just exhaustion. I'm not asking you to come, she said finally. I just thought you'd want the choice. That part stayed with me. You'd want the choice. That was something no one had given me before, not when Mom died, not when Rod moved on, not when Tarina carved up my childhood like it was furniture to be sold. I hung up without promising anything. But I sat in the car for a long time afterward, staring at the steering wheel like it might tell me what to do next. That night, Lucan and I talked again. It was nearly midnight. Mireya was asleep. The house was quiet. The weight of the past sat between us like a third presence. Are you going to see him? He asked gently. I don't know. Lucan nodded. Do you want to see him? I don't know that either. He reached across the couch and took my hand. Whatever you choose. I've got you. And that's when the tears came. Not loud sobs. Just quiet drops sliding down my cheeks. Not for Rod. Not for Tarina. But maybe for the girl I used to be. The one who tried so hard to belong. I went to bed with that question still circling my thoughts. Do I go? Is it for him? Or for me? The next morning, I asked Lucan's mom to watch Maria again. I told Lucan I was just going for a drive. I didn't say where. I needed to be alone with the decision, to let the silence of the road help me find the answer. I drove north. Past the flat stretches of I-25. Past the fields where clouds hung low and heavy like thoughts not yet formed. The hospital was in Boulder, of course it was. That place where they had met. Where everything started unraveling. I pulled into the parking lot but didn't get out. Just sat there. For a long, long time. Inside that building was the man who once told me I didn't belong. Who watched as his wife sold my bed for $50. Who let me sleep in a car instead of offering me a blanket. And now, he was lying in a hospital bed. Weak. Vulnerable. But was he sorry? Did it matter if he was? I never got out of the car. I sat in that hospital parking lot for nearly an hour. Watching people come and go through the revolving glass doors. Some carried flowers. Some had tear-streaked faces. Most just looked tired. You could feel the weight of worry in the air. That strange blend of hope and dread that only hospitals carry. I looked up at the windows, wondering which one was his. I thought about walking in. About sitting by his bed, holding his hand, waiting for him to wake up just to say, "You don't deserve me." But even that felt like giving him too much. He didn't deserve my voice. My presence. My energy. He deserved what he gave me, absence. So I started the car. And I drove away. Without guilt. Without shaking hands. Without a single tear. I didn't tell Brielle. I didn't return her follow-up text later that night. The one that said, "He's asking for you." Let him. Let him ask. Let him sit with the echo of his own silence. Weeks passed. Rod recovered slowly. Word came through the extended family that he could speak again. Walk with help. He wasn't the same, physically or mentally. Tarina had hired a nurse. Brielle had stepped up, playing dutiful daughter, though I doubted her motives. Maybe she wanted to be the martyr. Or maybe she wanted to feel like the good one. Either way, it didn't matter. He never wrote to me again. He never called. I think he understood that the door was closed. Permanently. But then came the part that no one expected. It started with small, legal mail. Official documents addressed to Celia Arvidsson. That was new. Turns out, Rod had been listed as a joint account holder on a small inheritance left by my maternal grandfather. A savings account that had been dormant for years. Unclaimed. My mother's side of the family had kept their distance after her death. They hadn't fought Rod for custody. They hadn't questioned his decisions. But they had kept records. Quiet, meticulous records. And when I turned 35, they notified the bank that the rightful heir was me. Rod had been using the account, small withdrawals here and there. $50. 100. Once, nearly 1,000. None of it legal. I sat across from a very polite banker in Denver as she explained the situation. "You're entitled to pursue legal action," she said carefully. I nodded. "And if I do?" "He could be forced to repay what he spent. Plus penalties." I asked for a printout. Every transaction. Every dollar he quietly took from the money my grandfather set aside for me. A man who died with no idea that his daughter would end up sleeping in her car one spring night. The sum wasn't huge, just under $20,000. But it wasn't the money. It was the principle. So I filed the claim. Rod would now receive letters in the mail from a law firm bearing my name. Cold, official language. Requests for repayment. Notices of breach of fiduciary responsibility. Terms like malfeasance and misappropriation of funds. I didn't do it out of spite. I did it for the version of me who stood in that hallway, staring at an empty bedroom. I did it for the girl who sat in a Walmart parking lot, wondering why she didn't matter. I did it for my mother. The fallout was swift. Rod didn't have the money. Tarina was livid. Brielle sent a long email, half apology, half accusation, saying I was kicking a man while he was down. I didn't respond. Because I wasn't kicking anyone. I was just finally standing up. The court gave them 60 days to settle privately. They offered me 10% of the total to drop the claim. I declined. They offered 20. I declined again. Eventually, the bank froze one of Rod's retirement accounts. And just like that, the full amount was returned. Every penny. I donated half of it to a local shelter that helps women transition out of abusive homes. The other half went into Maria's college fund. When Lucan found out, he just smiled. That's what dignity looks like, he said. Measured, calm, and sharp as hell. I never saw Rod again. Not in person. But a few months later, I got an envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single photograph. Me, about age 7, sitting on my mother's lap, laughing. We were both covered in flour, and her hands were midair like she'd been tossing dough. It was the kind of photo you don't pose for. The kind that catches joy when it thinks no one's looking. On the back, in handwriting I recognized as Rod's, were 3 words, "She would have stayed." I stared at that for a long time. And then I tucked the photo into Maria's memory box. Not because I forgave him. But because I forgave myself, for waiting, for hoping, for hurting. That was my real revenge. Living a life that made room for healing but not for them. Mireia is almost 4 now. She knows her grandparents as the kindest, gentlest people she could imagine. Lucan's parents adore her. She calls them Nana and Pop, and she doesn't know that once, a long time ago, I stood at the edge of a family that couldn't make space for me. She never will. Because I closed that door, bolted it, and built a home where love is not conditional. Where no one gets sold for $50. Where no one is ever told, you don't belong.